For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh. Today we are traveling back to the 80s to talk about Frankie Freako. Frankie Freako tells the story of a gentleman who is kind of sick and tired of being stuck in his traditional reputation, and as luck would have it, he accidentally opens up a portal to another dimension, which brings in rambunctious creatures that wreak havoc in his life and turn his world upside down. So this movie is the latest offering from Steven Kostanski, who is the writer-director on Psycho Gorman. And this is what I have to say, is that if Psycho Gorman was the love letter to Power Rangers and like 90s action horror comedy, this is definitely the love letter to the 80s kind of weirder side of the films. I'm talking about movies like Gremlins, The Garbage Pail Kids, Ghoulies, Critters. It's up along those types of lines. I think this film captures the 80s perfectly without actually being in the 80s. This film kind of has nodes of other like 80s like genre pieces as well, where you kind of have those like B-movie, like direct-to-video, real cheesy acting and writing, and even some of the cinematography in this kind of feels like it's a throwback to that era. And there is even some notes of some erotic drama, which kind of had its peak in like late 80s, early 90s. Those are also kind of tossed in here as well. And much like Psycho Gorman, this film also has this representation of practical effects and feels very much like it is grounded in that era. I think the practical effects in this movie are outstanding, and I wish that there were more movies being made like Frankie Freako. I will say that there is some problems that I did have with the pacing and some of the structure of this movie. This movie is a brisk 82 minutes and it flies by, and that's not really my biggest problem. Is that there's as the film transitions from the second to third act, there is just this kind of character dynamic that just switches, and there's no explanation as to why that is. It feels like there was bits of the story that were left on the cutting room floor, and it just kind of feels really choppy as it makes that era. I think my biggest complaint is there is a character that as they transition from the second to third act in this film, there is a complete 180 in their character dynamic without any explanation. And it kind of seems like there were scenes that were left on the cutting room floor to kind of make that transition a little bit smoother, but it's just such a gaping plot hole that kind of, I don't want to say deflates the climax of it, but it doesn't make it quite as effective as it could be. And I talk about structure. Structurally speaking, this movie hits a lot of those same structure points that Psycho Gorman, his previous offering, also hit. And it kind of made a little bit of the third act of the film kind of be a little bit predictable. If you've seen that film, if you didn't, this is probably a minor critique of mine as a fan of that film. I will say that while there are predictable moments in the film's final act, nothing prepares you quite like the final 10 minutes of this movie. Like anything that you thought you could have predicted, it just kind of, those predictions just kind of go out the window. And honestly, I really love movies that can kind of keep me guessing regardless of what I'm thinking. This movie is probably also one of the most lighthearted and fun films that we've gotten this year in the horror genre. And it's honestly something that I really admire about Kostanski as a storyteller, is that while there might be some of these deeper themes and humorous moments that we're kind of getting, there's like this like wholesome underlining that you don't see in many horror films like Frankie Freako or Psycho Gorman nowadays. And I really admire that. This feels like a perfect gateway horror film for a modern audience, or for those that are either showing their next generation movies like this, or and are just getting into the genre. This movie was absolutely hilarious. There were so many moments that had me in stitches. I, much like Gorman, I really admire Kostanski's use of humor here. Again, I go back to that whole lighthearted and really just wholesome nature of this movie. But with that said, I'm ready to run this one through our Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give Frankie Freako a 4 out of 5. Overall, this is not only one of the best genre pieces of 2024, this is a wholesome film that has a lot of heart, a lot of humor, and has a great 80s aesthetic to it that will leave you kind of guessing and continues the groundwork that he laid from Psycho Gorman. And this is the perfect modern day gateway horror film that I would recommend younger audiences getting into the genre. Check out. Frankie Freako opens in limited release from Shout Studios this Friday, October 4th. But let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we'll take a theme of mental health woven throughout the course of the film, which we're reviewing or talking about. We'll talk about it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. As I talked about this movie being somewhat surprising in its kind of finale, I don't want to give too much away, but I want to just say that you can never really underestimate the source of hope. And what I mean by that is sometimes I think in our minds we have this preconceived notion of what can bring healing to our mental health or joy or happiness or anything that can bring peace to our mental health. And the thing that works for some people may not work for others. I'm not a gamer myself, but I do know that there are a ton of gamer friends that I have that game not only because it helps their mental health, but it also creates a healthy community for them as well. I got into content creation, and now some of my best friends that I talk to on a daily basis, not just about the content that we plan to create in the future, but just doing life and day-to-day stuff with them have massively improved my mental health. And we also see similar arcs woven throughout the course of not only Psycho Gorman, but also here in Frankie Freako as well. And it's just a reminder that hope and restoration and healing is not this singular journey. It is not just this one way through or this linear experience, but it is a ongoing thing that is going to be different for everyone, whether that is healing from trauma or getting over a bad breakup or whatever is currently going on throughout your experience. Everything is going to be different for everyone. And I think sometimes we need to normalize the fact that there are benefits literally to everything in the world. If you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, click the links in our show notes below to check out our mental health resource library. Once again, Frankie Freako opens in limited release beginning October 4th from Shout Studios. In the show notes below, you guys will find links to our social media, more movie reviews like the one you're watching right now, that mental health resource library, once again, our podcast network, upcoming events. If you're a filmmaker, also links to submit your film or screenplay to our film festival as well. And if you want to subscribe to our channel, that button's down there as well. And if you would like to support our mental health education efforts by giving us a monthly donation via Patreon, all of those links are in the show notes below. So until next time, remember to stay classy and party on!